I'm going to do a quick software demo, which is maybe the bad news. The good news is most of it is free. And the second thing is, whether you're looking at Frog or not, it's a very step-by-step process I'm going to go through of how to go through building your curriculum and doing assessment. So it'll be useful to you even if you're not interested in Frog. A little bit of background, first of all, about Frog and why we're looking at this. So most of you will probably know Frog in this part of the world from our work with learning platforms. And the history behind that is essentially, if we go back 15 years, teachers weren't using Facebook and eBay and Amazon and Twitter and all those things like they do today. They were far further behind the children with technology than they are today. And the kids were playing on Xboxes and PlayStations and murdering things in real 3D, and then coming to school and getting a less engaging environment. So the idea behind Frog in our history was to allow the teachers to build something that engaged the children in a more exciting way through technology. Now, about 4 or 5 years ago, we got the good fortune to win a contract in Malaysia, which gave us 10,000 schools and every single school in the country. And that gave us two things. One was enough revenue to be able to invest heavily in development. And the second was a whole country to play with, in effect. So our vision changed from engaging children to working on data. So since then, we've been building together a set of things to get a better understanding of the education system inside schools. And a good example of this would be the Tesco loyalty card 15 years ago, where they introduced that loyalty card, and from that they were able to watch patterns of behaviour, and they found that the men were buying the nappies. Presumably mummy's been at home and just having had a baby, wasn't going out anywhere, so they'd be on the phone, the guy would get the nappies on the way home from work. As soon as they found that out from the loyalty card, they put the beer by the nappies and they watched the beer sales go up. Now we think it's education's turn to get the benefit of this kind of thing. There's so much data available in schools now. If we can find a way of pulling that all together, we can start to infer some real interesting things about teaching and learning. The problem we had is we didn't have the most important bit of information, which is how are the kids doing? What's their attainment? What's their progress? And we really struggled for 2 years because national attainment levels doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you enough information. I might be a 3B and Mick might be a 3B, but he's awesome at fractions and I'm rubbish at fractions, and maybe we're the other way around with algebra. So it didn't give us any meaningful information. So in August of last year, we came across the NAHT framework. Coincidentally, our chairman happened to chair that one as well, which is why we got, I guess, first dibs at looking at that. We saw that, and that was the answer to all of our prayers, because it gave enough information for us to be able to do something. So from that moment, we've been focused on becoming more of an assessment company, because we think the opportunity here is great for UK education in particular. So the first thing I'm going to show you, this is free. And everything that Mick talked about in building that framework is in this. So if I just nip into the national curriculum bit here, we've got key stages 1 through 4 taken in from the national curriculum. What we're also doing is we're now starting to talk to the exam bodies, because we recognise that in key stages 4 and 5 that you won't be using the national curriculum, you'll be using the AQA or the edXL or whatever. We also have a number of schools using this to build their own mastery curriculum. We've got a school in Birmingham that are introducing a character development curriculum that they're salting through all the other ones. So use these as a starting point, not as a this is what you should be using as it is. So I'm going to run into, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to reading. So I've gone into key stage 1. And what we can see down here are all of the learning objectives from the national curriculum document. All of those are in there already. And if we click the little edit button, you'll see that inside here you can change them. And as Mick said, we encourage you to do this. Don't take them just as they are. Go through them, work through them one at a time, and work out, first of all, what is it that I want to teach my children? Don't worry about when yet, just what do I want to teach them, and get that clear in here. And what we can see here is that M means I've modified that. which you should do carefully. If you've got something from the national curriculum, change it a little bit, that's fine. If it says, kid can count to 100, don't change that to they can tie their shoelaces, because then they're not going to do very well at the end of the exam. So you can change them a little bit. What we're finding is more interesting to schools, though, is this plus, which is I'm adding something. So maybe that's the character development. So you can add anything you want to any of this, depending on what you want to achieve as a school. What you can also do is you can move them around. So the children are assessed at the end of each key stage. So in key stage 1, that's years 1 and 2. It doesn't really matter too much what order you teach those in. So if there's a teacher in year 1 who's not comfortable or doesn't enjoy something, it's fine for a teacher in year 2 to do that, as long as by the end of that key stage that it's all been caught up. So there's some freedom in here to move learning outcomes between the individual years. Okay, where it gets a little bit more interesting is we have this concept of a KPI. Now you could use this to define what a KPI is any way you like. The way we're interpreting it is to say that this is where a more formal assessment will be done. So we can't judge everything. It would be ridiculous to try to assess every child on every single learning objective. So what's important to you, and as Mick says, go through those and work out what they are. Now there's two ways of doing it. One is to take the existing learning outcomes and just say that one is important to me, it's a learning outcome. What we've got as feedback from many of the schools that we've started going through this with is actually they want to group a few together. There are 3 or 4 learning outcomes that are all in the same kind of area, and what they'd like to do is group those into a little set and then put a KPI on that and assess that as a more than one outcome. It doesn't show it on this particular screen, but you can embed this down into 3 tiers and group them into all different ways. We also have something called a learning locker, and this is behind every single learning objective. So teaching notes speak for themselves. You can put anything that you want in there. Where it gets a bit more exciting is the exemplar standards, though. Now, the NAHT are going to put together exemplar materials, which is an example of what good looks like for every single learning objective, for every key stage from 1 to 3, for every single subject. Now, again, this is a starting point. Those are all going to be in there for you to use. And it's the NAHT, effectively, they've commissioned a load of good schools to give them some example materials of what they are. That's your starter for 10. Obviously, we want you to change those, to push those. Now, our view here is that if you can get everybody teaching to those and having the conversation around what they are, so that every teacher in your school has the same bar, once we've got the teachers teaching to that bar, we can then start to raise that bar. Now, initially you would do this just inside the one school, but what we'd love to see is the year 6 and year 7, the year 7 lull area really, being able to sit your secondary school year 7 teacher down with the year 6 primary schools and saying, well, this is what good looks like in our school, and this is what the children should come into our school with. And if you're a key feeder for that, this is what we expect. Now, you'll see later on, the beauty of this is that you'll be able to see from the primary school exactly where every child is strong or weak against every learning objective, and also dip in to see the evidence of the work they've done in primary school to make your own judgment if you don't trust the judgment that's been passed through to you as a secondary school. The second 2 areas we've got in here are both resources, and we've got core resources and extension resources. Now, we're going to make every effort. We're working with a team at the minute to try and put some learning resources in here as well. These are not for the teacher to use. The teacher will teach the children however's most appropriate to their knowledge of that set of kids. The resources in here are for the children to use independently. So if little Jimmy's struggling on a particular resource, his mum and dad, through a mobile app I'll show you later, can see that little Jimmy's struggling with, say, fractions. And in here is some resources that little Jimmy or his mum and dad can go to get some help to catch up with those fractions. The second area, which is extension resources, is to push a little further. So in the DFE guidelines, it's saying that we shouldn't push children forward unless we're absolutely confident they've nailed where they are. Now, to be clear, it doesn't say we can't push them forward. What it's saying is we can't push them forward too quickly. Make sure they've got everything they need right now before you do that. So what we have in here is the ability to put in some extension resources so that once little Jimmy's got to counting to 100, we can extend that in some more interesting ways before we move them on to the next KPI. Okay. So what we've got there is a curriculum coming in by default, which you can modify however you wish. There's exemplar materials provided, which would encourage you to take and build on. There'll be core and extension resources inside there, and you can mark these individual items as KPIs. Now, the next bit I'll show you is there is a statutory requirement now that you must publish your curriculum on the website for parents and whoever else to be able to see. So this now comes with that system built into it. Now, there's a number of ways we could have done this, and the first thought was obviously we'll put it in a PDF and then you stick it on your website and anybody can download it, and we've ticked a box. But when we thought about it, thought there's a much better thing we can do here. So what we've done is we've built a live system, and you put a link to this on your website. And what you can see in here then is every single learning objective in every single key stage and subject. Oops. And if you click on these things, you can whiz all around them. More importantly, where you've attached, there's not in this particular one, but where you've attached resources inside there, you also provide access to those for the parents. All of this is in the free stuff. So you could, as of 4 o'clock today, you'll be getting an email with a login to this. Feel free to use it. It's there forever. There's no strings attached. But this gives you the ability to not only publish your curriculum to all the parents, but also to provide the learning resources. So if anybody's struggling with anything, they'll be able to jump in and catch up. Is that all okay? That all makes sense? Did I say it was free? All right. Okay, so all of that has been built directly against everything the NAHT are doing. The next bit is the next step on for that, which is progress tracking. This bit isn't free, it is super cheap, and if you're a member of NAHT, it's even cheaper because there's a huge discount applied to it. So the first thing we've got in here is a set of classes. And what we've got down here is all of the learning outcomes, the learning objectives, and the children. And a class is obviously, it's going to be a year, so it might be year 2, a particular set of children and a particular subject. So we can see here I've picked one on reading. And I can choose to either see every single learning objective, because I should be teaching everyone, or I can see just the KPIs. And again, what we're saying is don't try and assess every learning objective. We need to just assess the KPIs. Now, when we did our research on this, we found there's loads of systems out there that have things like I can statements in, where people are assessing against every single one. And when we interviewed the teachers to ask them how they filled this in, what we got as a bit of an uncomfortable pattern was, ooh, there's a lot of stuff to fill in there. We tend not to fill them in individually. We just cheat a little bit to give us the number we wanted at the end. And that's because there's so many data entry points inside there. So what we've been looking at when we've done this is how do we make this so that teachers don't end up spending all day poking away on basically a pretty spreadsheet. So there's a number of things that we've done. Now, the first is, I don't know if anybody's familiar, we have something called Frog Snap, which is a free mobile thing. I think there's a free one for anybody actually, but it's certainly free for anybody who uses Frog. And the idea behind Frog Snap is it's about giving an authentic audience to the children's work and about getting mum and dad involved. So if I've made a brilliant papier-mâché dinosaur or something in class, the teacher can take a photograph of that, attach it to my name, and it instantly appears on a Facebook-style app that mum and dad can have. So when they're on the train, instead of sitting on Facebook and sharing their drunk photographs or whatever it is they do, they can actually look at their children's feed and like and comment on that. Now, the first thing that's doing is it's getting mum and dad involved in the actual education of the children. Second thing is it's giving the kids that audience. So instead of just getting it marked by a teacher, they're able to actually say, oh, mum and dad are looking at this, and so's granddad. So they put a bit more discretionary effort into doing it. Well, we thought, wouldn't that be a great thing to extend and put that now into progress tracking? So next time there's a papier-mâché dinosaur on offer in front of us, we can take a photograph of that, pick the kid's name, it'll instantly pop up the subject that we're in. There's a judgment of what we think that is if we wanted to apply it, or alternatively we just save it and it goes straight into the evidence bank inside here, which is recorded as evidence for later on for whatever reason. So the first thought is you very rarely be going in here. Most of this will be done through a mobile app where you put your judgments or your evidence in. If anybody uses Frog Play, which I know a lot of you in here will do, which is essentially a quiz testing system. Kids don't like being tested, so they're all wrapped in games. So from the kids' point of view, they're playing games. All the national curriculum quizzes are in there from Key Stage 1 to 5 every subject. And so they're happily playing games, but then the teacher gets a report back that says, well, little Jimmy's struggling in this area because they're repeatedly getting that question wrong. Now, the thought behind that one is that we can use those quizzes as evidence. We do have a few schools actually now looking at building question sets in there to create judgments as well. So there's an opportunity, potentially, to use that kind of system to automatically provide judgments. If you have other software companies that you work with, this kind of thing as well, we want to integrate as many as possible. It's not only Frog things that we want to plug into this. Anything that we can get plugged into this to remove the need to peck away at all of these things, we'd love to get them in there. Okay, and the things that you're clicking on, unfortunately this is an old version, but we've got the idea of traffic lights in here, and we're showing here as it's slightly confusing how that's presented, but the original idea we had was this child is struggling, this child is getting it, and this child has got it. And we went out with that idea, and I know a few schools have already used that outside of Frog, and we went out with that idea and tried it, and the truth is that doesn't work with that scale, because you start teaching the kids early on in the year, and most of the KPIs don't get ticked off till the end of the year. So everybody's graph looks like they're making no progress, because it all happens towards the end of the year. So we haven't done it on the screen, but what we end up with now in the work we're doing at the moment is two statuses. You're either where you should be or you're not where you should be. And you assess those at every term or half term or month or whatever it is that you want to do. And that works beautifully. There's all sorts of graphs and charts that you can produce from that to track progress and attainment and all sorts of things. It's really simple and it works really well. We know that most schools, like most people, human nature, like to have extra grades in there. So instead of not where you should be and where you should be, there'll be nearly where you should be and nearly quite almost where you should be, and there'll be all these grades. The truth is we've done some testing, and you can do that. You can put as many as you want in. We've done some testing on a variety of numbers. It makes no difference. You can put in as many grades as you want, but what you can derive from the graphs and charts from that doesn't give you any additional information. It might make the graph look a bit smoother, but it doesn't give you any better information to make judgments on. So our opinion on this, where we are at the minute, is where you should be, not where you should be. Keep it simple, keep it to the two. If you desperately need to add any extra ones in, do it, but keep it really, really small. Don't put too many in, and if you're going to add more, be very clear about what they mean, because otherwise you're just going to end up with nonsense getting back. Does that make sense? Yeah? Grand. Okay, so the other thing we can do in here now is we can add evidence, and again I remind you, we don't really want anybody doing it in here. They'll do it through a mobile app, take a photograph of the kids' work in the book or something like that. It also does video, it also does audio as well, it's not just photographs. But if anybody does want to add them through here, they can choose the KPI, you can upload some resources, you can also add notes as well. The system's currently getting a load of badges in there as well, all sorts of little merits and things like that that are getting built into it, which will be presented to the children. And we're also looking at providing something so if a child is struggling, we can actually manage that intervention workflow as well. So if there's a problem, we can track in here what we're doing to make sure that that child is caught up. What I've done there, by the way, clicking, is I've just clicked on Julia randomly. And what I can see underneath here now of all the terms is essentially a history of Julia's progress through this year in each term. So I can see every judgment that's been made, every note that's been presented, every piece of evidence that's been uploaded, every quiz if they've got Frog Play that's been done and the results of that. And I can also see the exemplar standards, so I can see how close she is to what we think what good looks like. Okay. Little bit just at the top, we've got all these codes coming through from the MIS, so if they're special needs, gifted and talented, free school meals and so on, all of those things come through. If a teacher wants to show it on the board, they can turn it off. More importantly, you'll notice there's some little red dots, and this is covering something that Mick mentioned earlier. So down here we can see where every child is against every KPI at a glance. What we can't see is what problems they had from last year. And that little red dot says there's an issue with the prior year. So as I click that, that's brought down 4 KPIs from last year that we've got a problem with. And I can see that Eleanor Andrews has got a red mark on whatever that one is. Now, that may or may not be critical. Chances are, if it's a KPI, it probably is. So if that was something like fractions, and I'm going to teach compound fractions now, it's important that I know what that is, and I can also then look behind there and see how that intervention's been managed to see what's being done about it. As the year 2 teacher, if that's a problem in year 1, it's now my problem to deal with that, to make that red bit green. How you do that is obviously up to you as an individual teacher, but we're tracking where those particular problems are. Now, of course, one of the ways they could do that is send the child to the core resources against that red thing, where they can catch up on their own time or over the school holidays or whatever, or they could provide a focused teacher on it or whatever. That make sense, that bit? They bounce up. If you're in a situation where you've got them from more than a year ago, obviously there's something serious going on, but they will cascade back multiple years. In principle, I think that's about it. I think for that one. Okay. I'll quickly run and show you. Oh, one thing. There is a filter in there that lets you look at this in all sorts of different ways and slicing and all that kind of stuff if you wanted to do that. I will also do. There is reporting. I don't intend to go into that now, but reporting, much as you'd imagine, there's graphs and bar charts and comparisons to average and comparisons to good and all that kind of stuff. What we also have here, though, is a My Child's Progress app. And I don't intend to go this in detail. And again, I don't expect anybody to ever use that one. I expect them to use the mobile version instead. Is that we've got the ability to track how children are doing on various things, but more importantly, to highlight where there are problems. And then we've got the learning locker so that people can go and catch up or work beyond their current levels on their own time. I think that's it. I think that's all I want to go through. Does that all make sense to everybody? How that works? The key there really in all of this is simplicity. And I just wanted to reiterate something that Mick said, that this is a big change, and it's a scary change. We've spent 30 years grading people 1 to 8. Now, it is possible to get graphs from this, and the graphs work perfectly well, but there's a big change here being suggested through the NAHT Commission to, instead of putting a badge on children that is largely meaningless, to be able to say, what does that child know? What should they know? Where's the gap? What are we doing about it? That's it. And most of this is really about the conversations we have in the school, about the understanding of where the children all are, the conversations about what good is, making it sure that we're all working at the same level, making sure that between each year we've got all these things as smoothly worked through as possible, so when they get to year 7 they're all in the same place best we can. This is a fantastic opportunity, we think, to step forward and really track the individual children, and not just, forgive me, produce graphs for governors or Ofsted or senior leaders. This is about really tracking the children and what they do and don't know, and doing something about it. I should leave it at that. Thank you very much.